Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me, Grzegorz? Yes, all good? Welcome
Yes,
everyone.
we can hear you, Dorota.
Yes, thank you. Welcome everyone at the regional webinar organized by Coface Central Europe, dedicated to exporters. We would like to present to you the latest economic insights by our chief economist, Grzegorz Sielewicz, and then to present to you our latest product, which we have, which is very important for these days, economic insight, which will be presented by Karolina Stein, our Coface Group Product Manager, dedicated to business information products. Dear participants of the meeting, dear attendees, I think that now more than ever, it is important really to keep a close look at the economical situation and the global situation. We are all aware that we started the year 2022 with quite challenging situation for everyone who is in the business, who is doing business, or who is working for a company, especially in the area of export-import activities. So it is extremely important to know well what is the global economy and what is the situation. Because we all know that now the situation is impacted by country situation with COVID and vaccines rollout, are impacted by infections and restrictions, which is impacting also GDPR of the country, fiscal policy of the country, and if this is supporting the activity and business or not. We all know that fiscal conditions are extremely important. Raising commodity prices, inflation, which is in all the countries everywhere, a big issue. So I invite you to listen carefully to Grzegorz, because he gathered for you, for exporters and other type of and companies doing other type of activity, in snapshot, a lot of information about global economy with focus on Central Europe. Grzegorz, after you finish your presentation, then we will invite Karolina to share the latest product which we have for our customers, for companies, to make their life easier in understanding better the situation. From the technical point of view, all participants can ask questions. So you can type your question, and after the presentation, either Grzegorz or Karolina will be able to answer your questions. So Grzegorz, I give the floor to you. Please start your presentation.
Thank you, Dorota. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you that you decided to dedicate this afternoon for our webinar. As Dorota said, we will go through various subjects. We will, first of all, it will be my part focused mostly on economic subjects from the point of view of exporters. And as Dorota said, I encourage you to ask questions. We have this tool that we use today. And on the right-hand side panel, you have the questions window, as it is written here. If you would like to drop your question during our presentations, if you have any comments, any concerns, or you would like to share your views, please do it. As we said, we will leave answering those questions to the last part of our meeting today, but nevertheless, as I said, you can ask questions via the tool already during our presentations. Well, so one more technical issue. If you find interesting, if you will find interesting our presentations, or you would like to keep it for later on to share it with your colleagues at your companies, of course we are happy to share it with you. Also on the right hand side panel of this tool, you have the handout section, and there's the presentation was uploaded there, and actually you can already download it from that already now. Okay, so that's from the technical point of view, and let's start my part of the presentation focused on exports, on economics. Well, so I think for you it will come with no surprise, because lots of companies that we gathered today, and actually we have lots of attendees, so thank you for your attendance, for your huge interest in our webinar. I think you know that perfectly, that countries in Central and Eastern Europe are, I would say, dedicated to exports, because of course household consumption remains the growth driver for CEE economies. But when we take a look at the share of exports in GDP, it's really huge. It's the lowest share is in economies which have quite high number of inhabitants, so like Poland and Romania. But in others that would like to go outside its domestic market, or rather their domestic market is too tight, too small for them, they are very active on export, much more active than the economies on the domestic side, on the household consumption. So here are some examples like Slovakia, Slovenia, Lithuania, Hungary. Those countries are really driven by the foreign side, by exports. And how does it look in last years? You can see the chart on the right-hand side, which, well, I think it looks quite complicated because I put here many countries, but I didn't want to miss any of you, because, as I said, we have representatives from many countries today during our webinar. Also from Austria, that's why I added not a CEE economy here, but the Austrian economy as a comparison to CEE economies. And here my point is that the export growth for last 10 years, it keeps growing. Yet there were some periods of time when we had a downturn of export, a temporary downturn due to, for example, the double dip recession in the Eurozone that was in 2012, 2013. But as you can see on this chart, it's actually not very harmful. And recently we had, of course, the first impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, all countries recorded a strong deterioration of export growth. But on the other hand, when you look at it from the current perspective, it was this so-called V recovery. We didn't have V recovery in other indicators, in other components of economies, both Central and Eastern European ones, and also other ones. In exports, we have quite fast recovery and coming back to the positive trend that was recorded previously. Actually, I think it applies to a number of countries. Of course, as you can see, in some cases we have a contraction recently. We will talk about reasons on that in a minute. But nevertheless, still, when we compare data 10 years ago, still exports are in a improving trend. As I said, here Austria is the example of Western European country, of the developed country. You can see that those dynamics are much lower than for emerging Europe countries. We in Central and Eastern Europe are very active exporters. We gather higher and higher shares of exports. Of course, please keep in mind that the volume of exports in Western Europe is still rather higher than we have in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think that is also confirmed here. But basically, here I wanted to refer to that what happened in last 20 years. And in last 20 years, economies, countries in Central and Eastern Europe were able to gather bigger shares in the global trade. And I think that's well, first of all, that was a great opportunity, supported, for example, by the European Union accession, but also overall by the strong willingness of CEE economies to have higher exports and have higher shares in the global trade. You can see on the chart on the left-hand side that especially countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, they increased substantially their shares in the global merchandise exports. Well, I said substantially, but you can see that this increase in last 10 years was, like in case of Poland, it was around 1.1 percentage point. At first glance, it could look that it's not such a high improvement, but when you compare that with Germany or just overall Western European countries, and even going further on, this is a very good result from CEE countries. If we take a look just on countries which were able to increase their shares in global trade in the last 20 years, we can find some small countries which did it, but sometimes there were some particular export contracts that affected the numbers. But when we would just exclude those temporary effects, when we conclude only countries with significant volumes of exports, then we would have mostly CEE countries that were able to have higher shares in global trade. Not only because we would have also Asian countries, mostly China. China was the country that has a very good result, actually increasing global trade shares. It's also during the pandemic, it was able to increase its share in the global trade. So I think it's a somehow kind of a different league, yeah, and that is not comparable actually with countries in Central and Eastern Europe. But once again, as I said, comparing to other countries, especially Western European countries, we are really on a good side with really good results. And I think that's already seen in case of Western European countries on the chart on the left-hand side. In those last 20 years, Western European countries, they lost 7.6 percentage points, whereas countries in the CEE region, they increased their share by more than 3 percentage points. But as I said, concluding the last chart, those small navy dots that you see on those charts, there's a share in global trade in 2020. So as you can see, in Western Europe, it exceeds 30% despite this contraction, whereas in CEE, it exceeds slightly 5%. So still, there's a much room to improve our presence in the global trade. And frankly speaking, I think there are good results, good reasons to have this higher share. One of that one of those reasons is that you perfectly know, and that was a competitive advantage already from many years back in our region. Those are labor costs. Compared to Western Europe, if we taken just the comparison of simple labor cost levels, comparing to that what is in Western Europe, in CEE region we have roughly 1/3 of labor costs that are recorded in Western Europe, at least in terms of the wages euro per hour. So on the chart on the left-hand side, you see those countries, those CEE countries indicated with navy colors. And as I said, you can see that it's below the EU average. Of course, it's below the Western European average, but also other countries, even Southern European countries, which in the past had to decrease wages to be more competitive. Still, most of countries in the CEE region are below that level, and also despite the fact that we have increasing wages and still the wage pressure in our region, which actually lasts for a long time, for many years. So that's one side of the story. Another that is we have the educated workforce, and another one I think, and that is important, and it is important to keep growing that, to have to be maybe not concerned, but to be focused on that, is that what we have with the productivity levels. And here on the chart on the right hand side, another chart very I would say overpacked with colors and data, but let me explain that to you what I wanted to show you here. Those are levels of automation. Automation could be also treated as some simplifying the processes in companies and so on, but Referring to data, I think the most evident way is to refer to use of industrial or service robots in particular companies. So here we took examples of various sectors from Eurostat database. You have automotive sector, the metal sector, machinery, chemicals, and so on. And first two bars in each sectors are for Western European countries, just to compare that with CEE countries. So Germany and France. You can see that in all those sectors we have Germany and France, and how many companies in particular sectors, what's the share of companies that use industrial or service robots. Then we have other countries that are in Central and Eastern Europe. And let's take the first example of the automotive sector. As you can see, the CEE countries have no reason to be ashamed of that. They are not automated. They are not really modern. They do not use robots in their production process, in their plants, in their factories. Actually, that what we have in Bulgaria is comparable in the automotive sector with the level that is in Germany. That what we have, for example, in Poland is comparable with that what we have in France. And in other countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, or especially Slovenia, the use of robots in the automotive sector is much higher than in Western European countries. Also, as you can see, that example could be copied to other sectors, and even like for the last one on the right-hand side of this chart, so food and beverages, you can see that Slovakia and Slovenia are much better in using robots, or much more companies use robots than in Western European countries of Germany or France. But I think it's not enough. We should go this way, because especially when we have labor shortages that again are coming back or came back after the temporary effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Still, though, that should be continued, not only to avoid the so-called middle income trap, but also to have companies more efficient with higher productivity rates, and as a result also that positively impacting export dynamics, and then just to be competitive more, not only thanks to low labor cost levels, thanks to geographical proximity to Western Europe, but just to higher know-how and as I said, higher productivity. And just one, or rather few words more on the workforce. I said we have educated workforce, and I think we could do a separate webinar on the labor market in our region, but just two charts on that, which I think are important from the point of view of forward-looking for in case of our economies and in terms of the competitive advantage of our exports. I mean Central and Eastern European countries are more and more are having more and more workforce that is really highly educated, especially in terms of the ICT services, which right now are very important, which are actually the support for all companies, whatever they are, manufacturing companies, services companies, and so on. As you can see, especially Baltic economies are able to have a high share of such employees. The workforce is educated, but I think more or less it applies also to other countries in our region. And well, I think that's again the conclusion for the future, that it should be invested more in such jobs that would contribute again to the higher productivity and better improvement of our economies, higher dynamics of exports, and as a result also higher share in global trade of CEE countries. But that's a kind of future thinking that I wanted to let you know what, according in our view, could be a trigger for the further improvement of exports. Right now, let's talk a little bit about current concerns. which for exporters, and not only for exporters, but for overall for economies, also for the global economy, the important issue is with the supply chain disruptions. Also, as Dorota already said, higher energy prices, which are impacting not only companies, but also households, transferring to higher inflation. But so far, let's stay with supply chain disruptions, because when I showed you, if I could move back to this exports chart with, as you can see here on the right-hand side chart, with the decrease of exports recently, a significant part of that, or a strong reason, comes from here, from supply chains disruptions. Indeed, it's not so much the case of demand, it's more the case of supply. Here, this is the example of Germany. Unfortunately, we do not have so many figures, similar figures for our countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but nevertheless, I wanted to show you the German performance, because for countries in the CEE region, it remains the main export destination. So as you can see, in Germany, we have increasing share, or even already now a very high share of companies that feel the shortage of inputs, or rather they report the shortage of inputs as their main problem. So the survey, the question in this survey was that not only if they experience that, but is it the main problem for them? And as you can see, especially for electronics, automotive, machinery, also the ICT sector, the shortage of inputs is the main problem, actually reported by nearly or just equal 90% of companies, so huge in the last quarter. The question is that how long it will be, how long we will have to tackle with that constraint. And on the right-hand side, you have the answer. It comes with the survey, so it's not 100% answer, but nevertheless, while companies in Germany were asked how they estimate duration of supply bottlenecks, and the survey was done in October last year, they mentioned generally in manufacturing that it will be 8 months. So somehow, somewhere in the middle of this year, we conclude that those supply chain disruptions should be not as harmful as they were in last 1 year or even more. In some sectors like chemicals and automotive, the latter one significantly impacted by the shortage of semiconductors, and the situation is expected to last longer. Of course, as I said, it's a survey, so we cannot be sure of that. There will be also some developments, negative developments that could affect companies, and as a result also economies. If you would compare similar surveys that are done among companies in the United States, they are more pessimistic. Actually, the companies in the United States assess that still 2022 will be the year of the shortage of inputs, and supply disruptions will start to diminish in 2023. So it seems that at least the first half of this year will be still the year of supply chain disruptions. And I guess for you, it's important what happens, of course, with transport costs. On one hand, of course, it's that transport that is done by roads, so fuel prices are important. They increased compared to the first wave of the pandemic, where oil prices were much lower. They were one of the lowest in last many years back. But on the other hand, for just global exports and also for exports in particular countries, it's important what's happening with maritime transports. At a first glance, maybe it could be surprising, because here in the CEE region we mostly use road transports, but for trade coming from China to Europe, from China to the US, it's very important what happens with the maritime transport. Of course, air transport, cargo transports, air cargo transports are used as well, but mostly still for high-tech goods, although it's somehow a little bit changed during the pandemic. So coming back to maritime transports, not only cost but also container throughput increased a lot. I mean that the access to containers, probably as you perfectly know, was really harder, especially coming on those transports coming from China to Europe with imports, and also our exporters need imports because not all of that what is exported from countries in our region is just produced domestically. Lots of inputs are sourced externally, especially in China, so that is also the crucial for exporters. Recently, we have a relief here with the container throughput index going down to similar levels that we've seen in 2019, but this is year-over-year growth. So please be aware that is here some impact coming from the statistical base effect. So the situation is still not very brilliant, not perfect. And that's the same with maritime freight rates, which decreased from the really very high prices, but they are right now at prices that we had only a few times in the last decade. So still they are one of the highest ones that we had before the pandemic. And as a last point from my side, a little bit more on the current global outlook, where on the left-hand side chart you can see the projections forecast of the World Trade Organization regarding the global trade. So still 2021 is the forecast because there's no final data for the last year. The World Trade Organization expected that the global trade will increase by more than 10%, precisely 10.8%. But I think they somehow overestimated that because supply chains disruptions, these supply barriers, probably we will see something below 10%, something like 8 or 9% as a final figure. But nevertheless, it's the improvement after a very weak 2020. And as I said previously, it's the recovery, strong recovery of exports, which fastly recovered to pre-crisis levels in terms of the volume. What we can expect in 2022? Quite good level, the similar one that we had in 2017, and that was, I think, a really good year in terms of the global trade perspectives. And exports dynamics coming from Europe, because we do not have excluded these forecasts just for CEE countries, but in general, European export, the pace should be even higher than the global average. And as you can see on the chart on the right-hand side, those are our latest forecasts for global growth. For growth for the largest economies worldwide. I think for us, it's the most important what is happening in Western Europe, as this is the main trading destination. And as you can see, well, not all countries were able to come back to pre-crisis levels last year. We do not have the final figures for last year, but according to the latest available data for the third quarter of 2021, most of Western European countries, their nominal GDP levels were below the pre-crisis ones. So mostly we will see coming back to pre-crisis levels in 2022. And in terms of other destinations, other possible export destinations, of course, we have quite high, strong growth coming again from China. So as you can see, it didn't record the recession as an entire year figure in 2020. Then it was still growing quite strong last year, and we expect 6.1% growth this year. I think one of the important points here is that the US economy, which was growing really strong last year, supported by various fiscal measures, right now it's coming back to that what we will see in other developed economies, so especially in Western European economies. I think that right now in this mix of the situation in the global economy, I think it's more and more important to look at particular cases. So what's happening in particular countries, because we should not have put I don't know, for example, the one region like Western Europe to one basket, because we have different situations. We have, for example, Spain, Italy, that are still very dependent on the tourism sector and are still affected by that. Whereas we have, for example, Germany that is going better. We have also situation in particular sectors that differs one from another. So I think it's more and more important to look case by case basis. And I think that's a good link to that, what Carolina will say. And before I will pass the floor to Carolina, let me just play a short video to you as an introduction to her part. Oh, sorry. We play it like this. Okay, Carolina, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gregos, and thank you for your presentation. So, everyone, happy to be here, and I wanted to introduce you Economic Insights. It's our new product. It's an interactive platform with Ataclan's insights that brings together all these different assessments that are reflective of different risk factors that are impacting today's economy. So when I'm talking about these different risk factors, I'm speaking about political risk, environmental risk, business climate risk, macroeconomic risk, etc. So our goal with this solution is to support our customers in their strategic and in their tactical decisions when they are thinking of expanding or investing in new geographies or new sectors, or even for managing their own business when they have positions abroad, let's say. So what we are aiming to do with this solution is to support you, providing you this complementing, let's say, this 360 view of a risk profile of a company by providing you this context risk. So what is the risk of the country or of the sector on which a specific company is operating? So with Economic Insights, and then I will move into a demo so you can actually see it more live what I'm talking about. We are making available more than 15 scores and assessments that are really developed using these quantitative and qualitative insights. These scores are developed by economists and risk underwriters, which are really experts on each of the countries where they operate. So they are really gathering all these ground knowledge expertise, and we are making available all this expertise to you in a solution. So all these exclusive insights, and here you have like a list of all these different insights that I will be sharing during the demo, are really unique and really reflective of our expertise. And these are why we are saying that these are like high quality insights. We are actually using these insights to manage our own risk of exposure. So before moving into the demo, let me share some example of feedback that we got from some customers. So we have this specific customer that's managing, it's part of like a logistic company, and they really wanted to invest in different countries. They wanted to start opening different branches. So even if they were really interested in the overall risk assessment of the country, they were keen on understanding the environmental risk, like physical risk that might affect or disrupt their supply chains. So they were keen on understanding if these countries were subject to extreme weather conditions, or what was their regulatory environment. And with economic insights, we were able to provide these specific insights to the customer. They were really using these assessments as a backup and as a reliable assessments to back up the decisions of strategic investments within board meetings. Then another customer that, again, they were really interested on the country risk assessment. What in this case, this is like a labor intensive corporation, and one of the key focus was how they could understand the political risk and how social index or fragility in a specific society could affect them. And just to wrap up on another specific example that I think it's interesting because it's more from the technical perspective. So we had this financial institution with international presence, and what they want to do is to incorporate these scores and assessments that I will be showing to improve and be more accurate when they are assessing the probability of default on a specific company. And this is also to incorporate them, all these insights, into their prevision engine. So one of the things that is key from economic insights is that we are making available this tool so you can analyze, but then you can download and integrate all these assessments. So it's more than 1,000 data assessments with history from all around the world in one tool, and you can integrate it into your own decision engines. So here you have a high-level view of what I will be showing. So there is some scores related to the sector risk assessment, then there is an overall approach on country risk assessments, and then all these 10 different types of risks that are influencing the economies of today. So let me present and share my screen so I can move into the demo. So let's me see. So okay, so let me know, can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can see your screen, Helena.
Okay, perfect. So one of the things that it is key to note here is that economic insights is an exclusive solution, and it's really far more relevant than just data insights or macro data for risk experts, because this, as I was telling you, this assessment has been developed capturing ground level and has been developed and performed by experts in the economy, in each of the economies. And really what economic insights and all these assessments are really going far ahead and deeper into all the complex of the trends and the complexities that are affecting the economies of today. So this is a first view. This is a global view. So we have more than 160 countries where they have the country risk assessment. This is the overall country risk assessment, and it's a measure of the way that payment behavior of companies in a specific country are being influenced by the country's political, economic, or financial perspectives. So it really speaks to the probability of default. So here, in all of the cases, you can, let's say, you can select a region, and you can assess all the different risks associated to the countries in a specific region. You can make this more granular and not just go to a specific region, but to a set of countries that you would like to benchmark. You can also go deeper into a specific country and see how the risk of this specific country overlays and benchmarks against other countries within a same region and the trend across time. For all these assessments, there is a explanatory of how these are built and what it means, which is really key when you're talking about this type of insights. One of the things that I was mentioning before is like, why is key that we can share not just the country risk assessment, but all these different sub-assessments or scores that are really influencing this country risk assessment. So the fact is that if you have more information, you can be more accurate and plan your strategy and mitigate those kinds of risks. So here again, you can select a country. So this is available for more than 160 countries. And you can see the strengths. So these are the qualitative assessments that are really performed by the expert in that region. So you have the strengths, you have the weaknesses, the risk assessment, then you have some measures that are using and leveraging unique expertise of Coface. So you have the debtor risk assessments, which is really the distribution, and it's reflective of a portfolio of companies within a country. It speaks to the probability of default in a 12-month period. And then we have the payment index here also, that is really an oversight of the payment experience and difficulties of typically companies that have domestic and cross-border trading activity. So in both of these cases, really what is really key to understand is that it's really very relevant when you can see the history and the trend, and when you can also assess like the acceleration and compare with other countries. So following the same approach of making sure that we can support our customers, not just with these overall insights, but with these particular risk factors and how these are affecting, we have all these different as influencers of or that are impacting the economies of today. So, and if you note here, the idea is that all these quantitative and qualitative assessments that gather this knowledge are expressed in scores that go from 0 to 1, where 0 is no risk, 1 is higher risk, in order for you to have this standard approach and be able to benchmark between different countries and also across time. So here again, you can benchmark and you see how a specific country compares with the rest of the countries in a region or in your own selection. So you have the banking assessments. This assessment speaks to the solvency risk and the credit risk of a banking system. Then we have the business assessment, which is really interesting, and it really aims to understand how easy it is for a company to do business in a specific country. So it speaks to whether the legal system ensures fair protection to creditors, or how favorable is the framework for business to business transactions. Then we have the environmental assessment, which really, so one of the key things on the business assessment is that it really leverages data from international corporations, but it also primary leverage Coface experience. We have the environmental assessment that mainly focus on two risks, the physical risk like weather conditions, etc., and transition risk regarding regulatory environment. And we have the macroeconomic assessment that is more linked to the macro stats and focus on the public real sector, etc. To complete this approach, we also have this political risk. Also, we are employing a Coface methodology. Again, here you can assess any country, more than 160 countries. You can benchmark between emerging economies, advanced economies. You can even select a country or a region and see how these different types of risk interact between them and across time. And to maybe wrap up, like the country risk assessments, we also provide this view of the trade partners. So you can select a region, and for that region, you can see what is the level of imports and exports for different countries and which are the main partners. To complement these country risk assessments, Coface has these assessments around the sectors, which comprise or is focused on 3 pillars: on Coface experience derived from the TCI business, trade credit insurance business, the financial results forecast, and the evolution of the commodities. And here again, it's covering the 13 main sectors, 28 countries in the major regions. And so we are covering these risk assessments for all the economies. Again, there's more than 7 years of history. And again, following this assessment on how we can assess a specific sector in a region and how we can benchmark, we have again qualitative assessments and these quantitative assessments that can help you compare a country versus another. So just to close the loop, so the idea is that what we want is to support customers. So we are really making available these 1,000 data insights with history that are derived from the exclusive expertise of our economists. And we are leveraging our unique data and experience to have these assessments, and we are making available this to you. Here you just click for a country, the period, you just select the score or the assessment that you want to download and integrate into your solution, and you have it. So the idea is to give you all this expertise at one click, so you can benefit from our experience and expertise as well. So that's all for this. I will leave the floor to questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Well, so as Carolina said, right now let's open the floor from the Q&A session. Let me just show you once again how you can ask questions. I will just show you again the presentation. Yes, so that's how you can ask questions. Once again, on the right-hand side panel of this tool, you have the questions window when you can type your questions. And actually, I already see some questions for me. First of all, this one comment, very useful comment, that bottlenecks for engineering plastics will last at least into the third quarter, if not into the first quarter of 2023. Thank you for sharing your view. And well, actually, as I said, that what I showed you with the survey, it's only the survey. Yeah, so the situation could look completely different in maybe not other countries, because lots of these supply issues are impacted by global situation, but I think it differs in a particular sectors, or rather subsectors, because when we have engineering plastics, we can include it in the chemical sectors, but it's the precise one. I think the chemical sector is so wide that indeed particular subcomponents of these sectors could suffer differently. But I think that's a very good conclusion, that well, it's mostly it's the first half of this year that we will still see supply issues, but actually not only. Whereas in 2020 we had the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic as the main issue, main concern. And then in 2021, somehow companies and economies got used to do business, to live in the pandemic, because we are still in the pandemic. But the issue of supply chains disruptions, of supply concerns became much more important than concerns regarding the pandemic. Then we thought that perhaps in 2022 we'll have another issue that will be the concern, but it seems that alongside with inflation that already started to rise, to increase some time ago, also those supply chain issues are going to stay with us also this year. So once again, thank you for your comment. Okay, and as I said, I see question to me. Could you please, if possible, to share some insights on how current China's sanctions towards Lithuania could impact the Lithuanian economy? Well, I think that for those who have not followed that outside Lithuania, let me just tell you that China decided to implement some restrictive measures indeed, because Lithuania allowed unofficially that Taiwan could have its representative office in the country, in Lithuania. Well, I think that although China is, like, from the export point of view, it's not a significant export destination for Lithuania, I think it could have some impact, because we've already seen that unofficially that some pressure is put there by the Chinese, I don't know how to say it, government or companies, because it's the pressure that comes to multinational companies. I think that was the example of Continental that does business, that it has factory in Lithuania, that it was reported that indeed some pressure is coming, that Lithuania should be maybe not excluded, but not gain so much by the inclusion in the supply chains. And I think that definitely it's a negative factor. At this stage, difficult to assess what could be the impact for the trade, for the economy, because we would have to see, like, if except of the pressure, some really strong decisions come here. But here, just let me remind you that Lithuania is strongly dependent on some inputs coming from China, and if imports from China would hurt there, mostly sectors like computers and electronics, but also textiles and clothing. Those two sectors in Lithuania are significantly supplied by components coming from China. So especially those two sectors could be hurt if there are some general sanctions implemented. If there are some targeted ones, then of course those particular sectors. Okay, let me see if there are other questions to me. Okay, when can we expect countries such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, or countries of former Russia? But to tell you the truth, I don't actually understand fully the question. Sorry for that. I don't get it. What we can expect? Do you mean like some, I don't know, coverage, or because in terms of those countries, we have country notes in the economic insights. Okay, when we can expect those countries in the EU, right? Because it says EI, but I mean that your question is that when they will be in the European Union. Well, at least so far, it's really a very forward-looking scenario, especially in terms of Belarus. That's really, I think, far away. I think that more we could expect that like Ukraine is closer to this process, and Ukraine already signed various agreements with the European Union, and that actually came it closer to the trade also with the EU, and those links, not only trade links but bilateral links, made it more intense between Ukraine and the EU. So far, in terms of Belarus and Kazakhstan, we do not have any like precise scenario for joining the European Union. Okay, let me take a look if there are other questions. There's a question, do you have any data about transports by land costs? To tell you the truth, I don't remember it right now. I think Eurostat provides such data. If I could suggest, if you would not find it in the Eurostat database, please contact me directly. Then I will do my best to look at it, because I remember that Eurostat provides various data on transports, and I'm not sure if this is also those one you're asking, but please check it. If not, please contact me. Then I will check it on my own. Maybe I could be somehow support here. Okay. And sorry, there was another question also here. Will an economic index, ESG, also be available? Yeah, well, basically in our assessments, in our country risk assessments, we take into the consideration the ESG part. We modified our methodology a few years back when we saw that indeed it's crucial to have this component in this part. So far we do not have it separated. Perhaps it's a good idea to have it separated, but nevertheless, as I said, in our country risk assessment, of course, it plays a role.
And to add to that, Gregor, so we are planning to start incorporating these new insights into our solution offers. So it is something that we have in mind, because we know that it is really key for a lot of our customers today.
Thank you, Carolina. Well, so I think we do not have any more questions. So we are perfectly on time. Oh, no, we have one more question coming. Inflation in Central and Eastern Europe in 2022. Okay, so in terms of inflation, we see that, as I said, it's likely to be one of the main subjects in 2022, not only in the CEE region, but also in other regions. And here in our region, I think it's quite tricky because some countries are in the Eurozone. I wouldn't like to mean that here that the Eurozone is a bad thing, especially in terms of exports. It facilitates the bilateral trade. It's really supportive. But here currently, perhaps you monitored the latest data coming from the Eurozone, and the inflation in the Eurozone in December reached 5% growth year-over-year. And there are two countries, the Eurozone countries, namely Estonia and Lithuania, which recorded double-digit inflation rates, more than 12 and more than 10% respectively. And when we take a look at other CEE countries, like, for example, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, Hungary, they already increased interest rates as a way of they use the monetary policy to impact the inflation. And I think currently those latter countries are somehow in a better position that they can use the monetary policy to affect the inflation. Of course, please remember that the biggest impact for inflation is coming from the energy prices, from those supply chain disruptions and so on. So rather external factors that rate setters in particular countries, they just cannot affect that. But part of the inflation comes also from increased pressure, from increased demand that we have had in last quarters. And with the recovering economy, we should see also the higher pressure just from the household consumption and so on. So indeed, also partly the monetary policy could help here to limit the inflation growth also in 2022. So as I said, we've already seen some actions done. For example, Poland implemented a so-called anti-inflationary shield, especially during the winter season, to impact the higher natural gas prices, higher fuel prices, with decreasing the excise tax, with decreasing VAT, value-added tax rates, and especially the higher inflation will be recorded in the first quarter, if not in the first half of 2022, especially that prices of commodities like those energy prices, natural gas, coal, partly oil, they will be impacted by the winter season, where usually the demand is higher, and usually that impacts, and also the prices are higher in that period. Okay, so I hope it answers your question.
Yes, I think it's time to close our webinar as we are just on time. So I would like to thank to all attendees for the time they dedicated. Thanks to you, Grzegorz, for sharing your knowledge on very important economic data relevant for the audience, especially for companies doing export. And I am very glad to hear that there are some elements that can help us to increase our competitiveness as Central European region, like what you mentioned, sharing the global trade, labor costs, increase of digitalization. This is really very positive. And of course, we have some negative news as well, yes. Karolina, thank you very much for presenting economic insight. And I would like to tell to all attendees that you might be contacted by our local representatives of Coface in the countries, because we have a special offer for all the attendees for the economic insight. And if you have any questions or you would like to know more about this product, please feel free to contact our local office, and we are more than happy to deliver to you more information, and of course to give you a possibility to use this data, because the economic insight application includes, and it's consistent of the information which is collected, gathered, analyzed by people like Grzegorz. So there is the essence, yes, of what our chief economist departments were doing for 7 years, because this data is back to 7 years from now. So it's really an essence of our knowledge of the economies. Thank you very much again. We are at your disposal. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact Coface representatives. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.